G'day and welcome to another episode of Perth Property Insider. I'm your host, Jared Mann, and today I've got part 2 of my interview with Jay Sidhu from Vision Surveys Consulting. I'm going to be getting stuck into some really great topics on how to find profitable subdividable property that stacks up. And we're going to be going into some of the finer details on preparing your costings. How does that all look as part of an overall feasibility? What sort of profit margin to target, and how that feeds into, I guess, your overall strategy for when you might develop something and when you might hold and later develop. And on a final note, we're going to be touching on variations and how to uncover some hidden potential in returns. So let's go inside.
Welcome to Perth Property Insider, where you will learn how to grow your wealth and improve your life using Perth property. Our show is brought to you by Investors Edge Real Estate, the highly rated and award-winning property management specialists servicing the whole of Perth. Now, here is your host, Jared Mann.
So where we are, I've inserted in here about how do you check up on services, because it's a big one that people leave out of the investigation.
So with services, you want to try and check out with Double before you dig and see what's actually in the area.
Yeah.
Now, very, very important to know where your sewer is, where the water runs. Is there gas in the area? Is it a Telstra area? Is it an NBN area? And also power lines. So always remember that high voltage power lines attract easements. Okay. Now, those easements may not be on the property at the particular point in time when you purchase it. But when you develop it, I'm going to have to create those easements on that development.
They're often not. I mean, people think, it should be on the title or it should be somewhere. But having worked for Western Power and I created some of these easements, it's not done until the subdivision application's in.
Yeah, exactly. So you'll have to go through and create a deed of easement with Western Power. There's an extra cost involved there, to and fro in regards to plan drafting and actually picking up 3D lines. So it's a cost, it's an extra cost, but you will know that from the start when looking at it and just looking and seeing whether or not that's a high voltage power line.
Yeah. I mean, I'm always hesitant when high voltage power lines are involved, not because I am an electrical engineer, but I think I'm more aware of the value, the impact that they have on the property. So you've really got to, I'm selling one at the moment. It's got the massive high tension power lines out the front. Virtually every person that comes up the driveway takes a moment to stare at them. On paper, the value should be, 400,000 compared to others. But when they look at those power lines, and we're dropping price before they even get to the front door. It can be factored in, and you can take this into account with your appraising of the end product. But again, I'd prefer not to introduce factors that are going to affect resale, because you might find a buyer for it in the hot market, but in a cold one, you're going to struggle too. It's not to say that never, because again, the power line easement could affect the property, but it could be running adjacent to it and not even in the peripheral and not seen. So that could be considerable or worth considering. Exactly. But I'd also be hesitant if it's running right outside and it's especially the higher up the voltage goes, the greater the structures are that then are more noticeable too. So I'm sure you've had to deal with a lot of power lines over your years. More than I have, even, because I only did engineering for 3 years and then I was out. So
created my fair share of easements on these ones. Sometimes you will just have to make a case with Western Power should you don't think it's required. More often than not, I see something and I just know. So you want to take that into consideration.
Yeah.
So the answer to your question again is double before you dig, and also the obvious visual inspection. If you see something that you don't know what it is, ask the question, so that we can actually look into it.
The other one with services I just wanted to mention before we move on, because I got duly reminded of it this month, is that if your lot boundary is within 50 metres of the height, any HV power line, a lot of all lenders, mortgage insurers, as far as I'm aware, will not approve lending. Yeah. So it basically means that your finance would have to be at 80% or less for, you and also your end purchaser. And that can really start to limit your market if you're trying to sell to first home buyers or all the first home buyers at the moment. I'd fall off my chair if one of them had a 20% deposit. They're all coming. They basically take their amount. They look at the budget that they could have if they borrowed at 80%, and then they say, "Actually, I'll borrow higher and get a better property." And they're always at 90 or 95%. So yeah, it just cuts out that market straight away.
Speaking about visual inspection again, of course, services is an important thing when you're doing visual inspection, but try and look at the slope of the block. It's kind of obvious.
Yeah.
We don't need the actual measurement of what the slope is, but just, is it a slopey block? Is it a flat block? And also always pay due regard of trees on the property, especially on the verge, to make sure that we're going to be able to put in new crossovers or not. It might actually make the subdivision a battle axe instead of a side-by-side because you just can't due to the tree. So that's something that you need to look into. So it's not always just the minimum lot size. It's what's there that's going to help you design it, because we obviously want to make sure that we keep, and you can't touch street trees anyway, but that's great because you want to keep trees. And now with the new policies coming in, you're going to also have to look at the significant trees within the block itself, not just the ones on the verge. Okay. If they get deemed as a significant tree, the local governments will actually flag that in their approvals when it goes back to planning commissions and their comments to them anyway.
And I guess some of the other things to visually inspect would be, what conditions the fence is in. That's a classic one that people don't take a look at. Adds up in your cost. And so when you're starting to put together all these costs, how detailed should you go, do you think?
Well, if you're really stretched for funds, then you want to try and go as detailed as possible. But for me, whenever I'm looking at a property, I can sort of ballpark tell you how much I think a subdivision is going to be. And my ballpark is within 10 to 20K. Now, that's just because you want to be safe than sorry. If I was looking at a 2-lot subdivision, I think you mentioned 30 to 50 before, I would mention 45 to 60. Because, sometimes that's the usual figure that it usually comes into. Then usually 45. That's what I see. Okay, for a very simple one. Unless if a lot of things has been done previously. So I never say anything less than that number because things pop up. And if it was somewhere in a different suburb, I just look at it and I go, look, this is usually a clay site. So I'm going to add a little bit more here because of site works. So that it just gives you that figure in your head. If you can't afford that figure that I'm giving you, then it really stretches you out. That's a problem. Now, if you go, okay, cool, now let's work and refine these numbers. Yes, the numbers will come down, usually in the right ballpark.
And with the costs, do you suggest someone itemizes them all out and how to? I love your ballpark approach because there's no point going more detailed if you can't make it work at a higher level too.
So why I do the ballpark figure is just because more often than not, people are just, should I even look at this property?
Yeah.
Now that ballpark figure is the first one. It's either if I'm flagging something really, really out there from the site itself or the fund. So if they go, look, I can't afford 100,000 for a site in Cannington and Gosnells, then they'll look to a different site. If suddenly they go, look, I'm really interested in this, that ballpark figure, okay, sounds all right, maybe a little bit high. Can you look into this a little bit more? Yes, we itemize every single thing that is in there, because then you're already going to the next step of, I want to actually do this. I really want to know what exactly is involved. Yeah. And obviously then by doing that, they're also paying for time. Yeah. So, ballpark wise, I can look at it for about 10 minutes and I can give you, and that's no charge for that. But when I start actually investing time and doing a proper itemized costing, then that's where it comes in. So it's more so yourself, whether you're committed to it and wanting to spend some money on that start investigation or not. Now, it's very encouraged that you do, but if you've got 100 properties that you're looking at, then you might want to start looking at which ones are the best ones that you want to go for. And 100 is an exaggeration, but I've had clients that come up to me with 10 properties. I go, okay, but which one are you leaning more towards?
Yeah, exactly. We'd be wrapped up in circles if people didn't actually get things down to a tighter selection before we gave input on things too. So the more educated our listeners are, the more we can help them as well, because then we can actually give our advice when it's truly needed and when it matters. And the other thing to note with these figures for subdivision is that you can't go to a bank and say, I want to do a subdivision, can you give me the money? That has to come out of cash, and or if you've got a loan facility set up secured against something else, you could use the money from that facility. But keep in mind that this is not something you can wrap into your overall loan without, extra security holding that loan, if that makes sense. Getting things down to the finer point where you're thinking, this might stack up. What else should we check to see to make sure it's feasible? Is there anything else that comes to mind that we haven't touched on?
More often than not now, during the stimulus package anyway, everyone was actually going to look at building the houses. I actually am a big believer of thinking of what the end product's going to be and try and make sure that whatever you're selling actually can cater for a good development at the back or someone to come up and actually be able to build something. So the land and form component is very, very important. So if it is something that you need to look at, you need to start speaking to your designers, or your architect, find out what you're going to want to build. And more often than not, people were actually trying to stay or retain themselves. Like after they demolished the property to subdivide, they wanted to live in one of the blocks created.
Yeah.
And if you're going to live in one of the lots created, you don't want to be creating a crappy block. It needs to be something that you and your missus and the family are going to be really happy with. Yeah. So think of that design component. And also when you're thinking of design components, tricky subdivisions can be solved at times, because if you can't figure out how the block's going to work, or we need to justify how a subdivision will work, the design of the building itself helps that. Okay, it shows and proves that can work. And without that, people are just going to go, well, this is not a good block. We can't make it work. And by people, I mean local governments, planning commission, and others. Okay.
Yep. And I guess the other part to that feasibility is working out what your end prices for things are. So it is really hard when someone comes to me and says, I'm looking to subdivide a property. What can I get for a 3x2? And I'm immediately like, okay, what's the land area at the rear if it's on a rear? What are you looking to build? What spec level? So I'm going to come back to them with those kind of questions. But I can give them ballparks as well as you do, and then they can start to see if it's going to work top level before they go deeper.
Yeah.
And they can chat to builders then and also get some ballparks from the builder and get your input as well. So really it's a combination of yourself, a builder, a real estate agent, and I'd also look at the fallback position of renting out as well. Here's the rental appraisal. What's your plan? Are you looking at keeping them or selling? And I'd still consider the sale aspect even if you are keeping them, because you never know when you may have to sell, and you want to know that you're building something of value that is worth putting all your money in and getting a return from. You want a return from doing this project if that's your intention. Again, getting back to why you're doing it.
And one more thing also, don't know whether we've touched this in the previous one or not, but worth highlighting again, title of your property. You want to know what kind of title it is. Is it a green title lot that you're purchasing? Sometimes real estate agents can go, you can subdivide this block, but it's actually a survey strata title. So you've got to remember that with survey stratas, if you were re-subdividing, you need the neighbor's consent. And if you can't get it, then it's a little bit of a more tricky situation. I'm not going to say impossible, but obviously with talks with the neighbors, and sometimes they change their mind and the likes. But you want to know that up front, because if you've got what you're going to pay for your development, and also you've got a time frame in your mind, that time frame is definitely going to blow out if you don't have consent from the neighbor at the start and trying to get them on board. That's going to take time. Okay. So title is very, very important. So look at the titles. What are the encumbrances on there? You want to look at restrictive covenants on titles. Sometimes you're going to have lots which are going to say, look, yes, you can, anything that is built on this lot has to be brick and tile, has to be. But now there's new methods of construction. Sometimes you don't want brick and tile, but because of that, you are then bounded by brick and tile unless you try and remove that restrictive covenant. And removing that restrictive covenant is not like, you may be aware of the older restrictive covenant of where they limit only one dwelling on the block. Now that one there is a little bit different because the Art Code has changed that development, so the council sort of lifts that when you do a subdivision. But with stuff like the house has to be brick and tile, and get legal advice on this, obviously. But it then bounds you to brick and tile, and if you did want to change it, your lawyer has to be involved. They then have to then get in touch with all the people in the surrounding area. I think they have to figure out how many people they got to talk to the council. You got to advertise it. You got to try and get that removed. Now, why I'm bringing that up is extra cost, extra time, and potentially not the outcome that you want. But more than not, people are okay with brick and tile. But I've definitely seen this example where someone gets into a building contract with non-brick and tile and later finds out that they needed it to be brick and tile.
And they're kind of wondering whose job was it to check this.
Exactly. You've got the title there, the restricted covenant is there, and especially if the builder's going, there's no issue with this. The end user is going to go, well, the builder who is in charge of building says there's no issue, so they're going to think it's no issue. Why wouldn't they? Correct? And sometimes you're busy and the like. So you just want to pay attention to that title that you're looking at. Look at the plan. Look at the strata plan, the survey strata plan, or the deposit plan. Find out what's there. Is there drainage?
See if it's clean.
Yeah. Ask the questions. Yeah, for sure.
And what is the difference, I guess, ultimately when we're creating a strata development versus a green title? How do we kind of approach what's required for each?
Well, if you're creating anything, the basic thing is if you're creating anything with common property, it has to be under the strata title that green title does not have common property. Okay?
Yep.
So if you had to go your access where it's common property, then it has to be survey strata.
Yep.
Okay? If you're doing subdivision, a normal land subdivision, or if you're doing it as a build, then it has to be built strata. Green title has to be completely independent. That all the services has to be independent. So you've got to have independent power, independent sewer, independent water, everything. Sometimes that lot, when you're actually creating it, you'll need to do more work to get that lot to be independent. And that's where, people have to speak to likes like of you and go, Jared, how much extra would you sell this block if it was a green title? And you go, no difference. Well, if it's no difference, then why would you be spending all this extra money to do it?
And it is very area dependent. And when you're in the more premium areas, people do care a lot more about it. You're going to get your return from doing it. But if you're out in the lower end areas, someone just says, can I still build a house on it? Yes.
It's so true. That is the question. It's the exact same thing. And well, that's the main difference there, really. But I can delve into it a little bit more, but I can always give you links of stuff to look into. But there's this few things with survey strata as well. The other difference now with the new Title Act changes is you want to make sure that if you've got a 2-lot plus common property and above and below 5 lots, you want to make sure that you try and do the small scheme exemption schedule of bylaw so that you don't have to do annual general meetings. That is a requirement. You have to do it. If you didn't put that as a small scheme exemption, then you better start having all these annual meetings and having records of it just in case something happens later because someone's going to ask you. Now, you may, let's say, Jared, for example, you may have a property and you're subdividing it and you're not selling the property, okay? And you've got 2-lot plus common property. And you go, no, I'm not selling it, Jay. It's all good. I don't want to do the bylaw because why would you? But then later when you're going to come and sell, then you're going to have to prove, it is essential. So then all that costs will come in and you want to try and do it. And why not just have it done at the time of the subdivision and just have it done? Yeah, it's just my humble opinion. It is extra cost, but I think it's worth it. And I make sure that all my clients understand and do it.
Being the one that sells the properties too and knowing the reactions from buyers, it makes such a big difference. It just makes it so much more sellable too.
Yeah. So. And look, at the end of the day, I'm not the one selling the property, but because if I need to put myself in my client's shoe, they need to make sure that the property is able to be sold, and I'm going to give pointers to help that happen. That's it. And if any pointers that I give is going to be based on experience as well and what I see out there or maybe anything that I hear from the likes of you and other people that I deal with from time to time, and how I would have done it differently potentially. So then you try and remember that and then share that with people. That's all.
So when it comes to the actual profit that you're trying to create, I know there's different benchmarks and people have various targets for what they're trying to create. I've always gone off 15% kind of clear cut, and I'd usually do that before taxes are paid, and that's return on total expenses. But other people have different benchmarks. I'd probably suggest you never do anything unless it's 10% and above, but at 10% things get very thin on the ground and you can have one cost blowout and you're in trouble. I have preferred to keep it at 20%, but especially in the more difficult markets where the market isn't necessarily going with you. Back in those times, we'd look for suburbs that were more stable and that you can be more confident in prices, and then you might be willing to forego a bit on your projected margin. But again, it comes down to your confidence factor and how many of these you've done as well. So you may want to target a bit higher on your first. And if you've got a personal factors involved, like you mentioned earlier, if you're creating a place to live or a home, you may even do it to break even if it means that you can get into your desired area where there's no other land for sale, for instance. It may still be worth doing it to break even. So
I cannot have a blanket thing of 20%. I try and do it, but you're right. It makes it a lot harder in markets like this. But if you keep at it, we managed to find another one recently. So hopefully it works out as it's projected. What I thought. Yeah, as it's projected. Yeah. So, but that's just something that I have in terms of this is what I want. And so I try and work towards that. But if I sometimes think that I need to go a little bit lower just to get it, that's fine. It's just circumstantial.
So in this market, it is really tough, and it does seem like people are overpaying for sites. So I thought I'd touch on how do you work your numbers and your overall strategy when everything that you're looking at may not have that sort of margin. What are some of the factors in that, do you think?
Well, I've actually stuck my ground here because like I just said before, went to a couple of auctions where I just went, no, I'm not going to do it.
You're walking away, yeah.
I'm walking away because the thing is that we've got some investment strategies where we're going to do long-term holds. And that's fine.
If it's a long-term hold, I guess you make sure that it stacks up and that it can actually be developable. And the numbers might not quite be there. It might be like a 10% margin now, but the market's moving up. So you get that quality property. You know it can be developed. You've checked with Jay. It fully checks out. You're happy that it can be done. The worst thing that I see people do is overpay for something that can't ever be done, and then they only work it out later when they go to do it.
The long-term holds usually have rental and they have leases in place that are going to go for a while. So the money is still coming in. It's you have that strategy in place. But for anything that I want to do personally, which is in the short term, I make sure that it works. The numbers I'm comfortable with those numbers. If they're not, then I'm just not comfortable with it. What I'm also doing, also building on top of it, the question about, do I build or do I not build?
Yeah.
So that's the other thing. If you can't sometimes get that figure that you want, then suddenly by adding that build component in it, yes, you need more capital, but that build component comes in and suddenly that it makes it more viable. So you got to make that option. It's not for everyone. I remember when I first started, that could never be in my mind at all.
But sometimes with the build, like you may think it's a bigger project building, and it is. Like, let's not pretend otherwise. But your builder can also do a fair bit of the work and running around if you include things in the building contract. And I would still get the titles created side by side, as we've touched on in a previous episode, and get you involved in doing that.
Yeah.
And sometimes the builder can de-risk things by actually giving you fixed costs for things when you might not have a handle on all the costs yourself too. So that's another advantage for someone starting out.
Well, yeah. So just review all the contracts. Who are you talking to? What's your discussion with them? What is your end goal with them? They're going to come back with what they think you're suited for, But obviously make sure that you review all of those stuff, because sometimes also some of my clients have come back to me saying that, oh, I thought this was going to be done, but it's not. Yes, we had the discussion, but it's not in writing. So it's just pointing it out. Just make sure that you're aware what you're going to be getting.
Where the gaps are. Yeah,
where the gaps are. Yeah.
And, we've spoke about, I guess, some of your strategies, whether you're looking at a long-term hold or something to develop straight away. And I touched on a property earlier that the coding wasn't known to the agent. So if you find some of these hidden properties with potential, that can really take the returns up a notch and get them to where you need them to be. Is there any kind of things you might add to uncovering potential that isn't known?
No, that's make sure that you know the zoning. And Jared's right. Sometimes you seriously see, like, I think I saw an ad the other day in iLuca, actually, the agent just said it's not subdivisible, but it actually is. So, I didn't want to get that block because at the moment, really, I don't think that I wanted to at that time, but a client of mine was looking at it, and I said, I can subdivide it if you try and get that through for me. And it also works the other way. Changes can also hinder. So you think you can subdivide, everything shows that it can, but you're not really in the know of what changes are coming in, and they suddenly change offsets of buildings and suddenly the design of that block. Remember, I mentioned before, you want to make sure that the block that you're designing can actually cater for a good dwelling. Now, if setback requirements change and the likes, and suddenly that building at the rear is going to be really tight and people don't know what to do with it, that hinders buyers from this particular block. So do check all that. And I mentioned that, can't delve into it too much, but go and check some recent changes in the city of Joondalup just to make sure that you're on top of the new changes that have just come in or they're trying to implement.
For sure. And what would you say as a final touch on to how to use, or I guess look at variations that might be possible? I see people often assuming they can get various variations through when, there is conditions that need to be met and it needs to be approached with experts.
So my take on variations, and my clients are well aware of this all the time, no matter how small the variation, a variation is a variation. So that means that you are taking the risk of potentially it not going through. And even though if we're just talking about an average variation of 2% rather than 5%, you've got that allowable 5%, you can't increase more than 5%. But anything below 5% doesn't mean you're automatically, oh great, it's below 5%, so it's going to be 100%. No, below 5 or 5, it's still going to be treated as 5, okay? Just like it's as 5. And you got to explain why this should go through. All right. You need to reason and you need to show why it should be subdivided. And that's within that 3-month process. So whenever a client goes, oh, okay, so you can't guarantee this for me. I said, no, I can't guarantee this for you, but I can tell you what the potential of getting it through is and my thoughts on it before we go in. Because I don't want to take on a project that I know is 100% not going to get through, because there's a lot of money at stake for the clients. And I want my clients to come back and do more developments. It's not one-time thing. You
definitely comes back to
you get it back.
Definitely comes back to your risk profile as well, doesn't it? If you're willing to accept the plan B that you won't get your subdivision, and look at, does this property actually stack up as a purchase? For what are you going to do if it doesn't? Basically. So.
Exactly. And look, education is a big part of that, and you're a big advocate of that, and I like that. That's why we're tuning this. And I try and educate any of my clients who ask me a question all the time. Try to put out some video content for my followers on LinkedIn. Classes.
Well, if people do want some more, I know you're a busy man and you said we needed to wrap, and we've already gone way past the time that you gave me. Thank you so much. But what should people do if they do need some more help and education from you?
Well, look, get in touch with me, and my details are with Jared there.
We'll put in the show notes.
I've also restarted our masterclass series due to a lot of phone calls and a lot of emails. I stopped it because of COVID, and now it's with the higher demand, I'm starting it back now, but with a more of a rebrand and it's called Land and Form Development Masterclass. So and it's more of what I mentioned before. You want to think of the development holistically, the land component plus the form component, because you can't build something good on a block. I don't think that block should be created at all.
No.
Okay. Or the other way around, you're trying to build something, you want to try and see how to title it as well. So the same thing. So that's in collaboration with my architect friend, Vadim Boykov from Project Architecture. And we take on this class monthly. And I'll give you the waitlist.
Yeah, we'll pop the link in there. And I understand that it is pretty oversubscribed. So jump on the waitlist and Jay will keep you updated when the next ones are posted. But thank you so much for your time today. I know how hard it's been to pin you down and really appreciate it though.
No, all good, mate. Always a pleasure to talk. Until next time.
Yep, chat again soon. See you, mate.
See you, mate. Bye.